Can I get everyone's attention for a second?
Sorry.
This summer, starting in 2 weeks, at the Shala, which is right over on Broadway and 12th Street, the amazing Ted Lafferty is teaching the first chapter of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which teaches you basically about practices that make this kind of stuff easier to understand. And it's going to be every Sunday. You'll learn how to be a yogi, how to really be a spiritual practitioner in a place like New York City, and it's really invaluable information, so you guys should all check that out. And donate to Free Joseph.
Sign in and donate if you didn't.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Sam. I like your catching on that it's real. Yeah? Thank you. I heard that. So, look, I don't mean to confuse you, but we're trying to figure out reality, and I'm trying to give you and it's not as easy as it seems, because we've got several thousand years of people thinking about it a certain way, and we have camps in our world that think that the world exists in certain ways, that the universe. And I'm trying to paint a picture of all these permutations of thinking around reality from a positive sense and from a negative sense, and that will make sense too. So dependent origination, the deceptive way, a positive way of explaining that, how things dependently arise, how they come to be, and the negative of that. What is it that emptiness is talking about? What does emptiness mean? We're going to get to that too. Okay? So far we went through the historical view of how the ancient schools of India came up with these ideas, and I think we're Abhidharmists, whether we want to be something else or not. We truly think that things come from their causes and conditions. You would not go to work and you work your ass off and think that that's not going to give you money, you know? We think that way. We experience the world that way to a certain degree. You plant a seed and you get trees, or fruit, or marijuana.
Or you don't.
Or you don't.
Or it doesn't grow,
Yeah. Yeah. But what I'm saying is we have this tendency to think of cause and effect. Science tells us it's that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. That's all good for something, but is it true about the way things really are, the real nature of things, right? So I have 10 minutes to do, and I didn't even do review today. What happened with that? So let's talk about the prasangikists, the consequentialists, yeah? And they think Mingde Taksam. Say Mingde Taksam. Okay. It means name and thought labeled just. It means things arise dependent on a label and a thought. It means, they say, dependent origination means not that things come about because they're produced through causes and conditions. They said that's a Neanderthal way of looking at things. I'm sure they didn't say Neanderthal. I just made that up. But you get the idea. Yeah? They say, look, that's a good explanation for a child. Things come about for causes and conditions. A better way of explaining it, a more subtle way to explain it, is that things come about, the only way things are produced is dependent on their parts. That's more holistic. That covers everything under reality in the universe. Everything. Because it includes space and emptiness. Not space as in the universe space. Space as in the coordinates of this location. Okay? So it covers changing things and unchanging things. They said that's a more advanced way of looking at it. But they say, the Prasangikists say, the real way that things come about is that they are dependent on your perception, on the way that you label them when you experience them. That your mind labels them a certain thing, Hector, the teacher, Dharma, the words, forced upon you. And that is how things exist.
works the other two ways as well.
Exactly.
It's only as a result of cause. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can only say there's a cause if there's an effect.
So that's what I meant before, that when you look from the bottom up, the others still make sense and function. But when you look from the top down, you stop at your own thinking. Because if you only think things come about by causes and conditions, this idea of parts is weird. And so you're stopped. And this idea of perceptions is weirder still. It makes no sense. Stick with me for the next 10 minutes when we explore what it means that things come about through your perception.
What does Ming mean? What is Ming again?
Ming, I think it's name. Or, I can't remember actually. I think Ming means name. Yeah? Yeah. Thank you. Go us. For having good notes. So depending, things appear dependent on you calling them that way, your mind labeling them that way, your perception of those things. Then what would emptiness mean? What would the inverse of that mean in that school? If we go back to the first two schools, the functionalists say that a tree appears because it's got seeds and plants, seeds and water and earth, right? That's how a tree appears. The primal cause is a seed, the rest is the conditions. That's how a tree was produced. How is a tree not produced? Yeah, no causes. Yeah, you can't have a tree. A tree that does not have causes can never exist, they say. Yeah? That tree can't exist. A tree that just popped out of nowhere. That's the first thinking. The next one says a tree that has branches and fluffiness and trunks, that's a tree because it's got parts. A tree that does not exist under that explanation is a tree that has no parts. One thing that's a tree. Yeah? Never exists that way. So what could a tree that is labeled a tree because your perceptions are forcing you to see it as a tree, what would the opposite of that be? What would not a tree be in that thinking? It could be a bunch of data that your mind just can't label a tree. Yeah, you can't look at it as a tree. It's still data out there, but there's something in the perceiver that can't make it be a tree. There's data there, that sameness in everything, depending on what you're thinking about, that's that thing that supports the data, yeah? That blankness for which the label goes on to, that's emptiness. Okay? The potentiality for that thing to be labeled a tree is its emptiness.
So you see it that way, that's what you see.
No, when you see it that way, you actually see dependent origination. And what I mean by that, let's use the example of a kettle boiling on a cooktop. You will, if you study hard enough, this idea of dependent origination, and you go to the highest school of thinking, that things are dependent on you labeling them that way. There are minds in the universe, like that of a dog, thanks for the chew toy example, or an ant, or an elephant, or a monkey, or a baby, or there are minds that perceive this data and cannot call it a bottle. It's just not a bottle, it's not a functioning bottle for them. There are minds that perceive this data using the highest explanation that can never see that like you see this. In fact, every single mind in this room is perceiving this in a slightly different way, dependent on your perception. The flavor of it, the depth of it, the color of it, the shininess of it, the use of it, the attractiveness of it, and the rest, all of it, using the last explanation, is dependent on your perception. Now, that does not mean you choose it. That perception came from something. That's forced upon you. We'll investigate that later, but for now, for the purposes of understanding dependent origination, the highest view of this thing called how the hell do things exist Because if we figure that out, we know how to interact with them. The highest view of that says that things exist dependent on your perception. And when you have that, then you've included, when you understand that, you've included every single object under the sun, and it can make total sense that a beautiful thing for one person can be a revolting thing for another, and there's no conflict. Because it's not in the thing, it's in the perceiver. The next problem becomes figuring out why the hell that perceiver got that perception and that one, but we won't get there today, okay? So there will come a time when you will be doing an activity, and if you've understood this enough intellectually, remember there's two ways of understanding reality, yeah? Intellectually and directly. If you've had enough training in your mind to try and figure this out, and please, if you've got 10 seconds of energy to double your efforts, listen now. There will come a time when if you get enough of this knowledge in your mind, deeply rooted with the right motivation, the first two paths, you will be able to see yourself in an activity like boiling water on a cooktop, on a stovetop, and you realize that thing out there, the pot and the flame and the water, could never exist out there separate to what your mind is projecting onto those objects, into that data. And when you get that popping in your mind, where you see that it is nothing but mental projections imbued upon data that is not what you think it is, you've had a direct perception of the first of the two truths. You understood directly dependent origination. For the first time in your entire life, you actually get a taste of the ice cream about your entire existence because of that example. You realize for the first time you misunderstand everything. And that can come with training. That's just an intellectual moment. When you dived into an experiential moment, it begins with training. And when you see that moment, and if you've had enough practice at meditating and you've allowed your body, your body to habituate a meditation stance and your mind's capacity to focus, that will be the trigger for you within the next half an hour or an hour to go and find a room and sit down on your cushion and use what you just saw about dependent origination and fake reality and perceive emptiness directly. That will be the trigger that will allow your mind to go into, things start popping very quickly after you have that direct perception of dependent origination. You see reality fall apart. You see how it just comes from you. It's nothing out there. It was all a lie. There was no Hector here teaching these words that have meaning from their own side. The meaning you're putting on these things, these are just sounds. Your ear can't do the meaning. There's nothing in you physically or in this that can give you the meaning that you're getting now. That is forced upon you by your perception. The proof of that is that you're all perceiving something slightly different. Some of you look annoyed. So when you get that moment where you perceive dependent origination directly, things start shifting inside of you that will force you to go and get this moment that if you've had enough training with your body in meditation, you can see emptiness directly. You can't see it without training mentally. You can't see it without being able to sit in meditation for a sustained period of time. So then I've got to talk about two more things. I need to talk about duck. Say duck.
Duck.
Aren't we sick of ducks? Yeah. We stayed at a hotel, her and I. She's got a husband, but we stayed in a hotel. That's her husband. And it's called the Peabody. Yeah. And everything had a duck. Like everything had a duck.
And they had real ducks.
And they had real ducks. They spent $200,000 for these ducks to live in the hotel, and they walk around the lobby and someone cleans their poop. Anyway, no one walks around behind you paying you $200,000, right? So duck, different kind of duck. This duck means self. And I want to clarify something. You know, this idea of self, in Buddhism we say no self. What does it mean? I need to describe that because that was a big problem for me before I came into Buddhism. I had these assumptions that it means, do I not have an ego? Do I not exist? Am I not me? What does self mean? What does duck mean? Here it means self-nature. Self-nature, i.e. any goodness comes from the object. Any knowledge comes from the words. That things have a nature of their own. That's all it means. It doesn't mean ego. It doesn't mean your identity. It just means self-nature. The table has a self. The wall has a self in Buddhist thinking. Yeah? That the self-nature of the wall, for being a wall from its own side, can never exist, is what all schools are agreeing upon. And they're trying to figure it out through these explanations. There's no duck. Yeah, duck does not exist. Luckily, unluckily for us, that didn't happen in our hotel. There were lots of ducks. So the functionalists say the duck, the tree, the functionalist people, cause and effect. The duck that they deny, the self that they deny, is that there could never be a tree without causes and conditions. A tree that comes about without a seed, causes and could never be a tree. The second school says, or the second thinking, the independents say that a tree without its parts could never exist. We just covered that, right? And the third way of thinking about reality, the consequentialists or the implication school or the prasangikas, the highest way of looking at it, there could never be a tree without you perceiving it as a tree. For the ant crawling over it is not a tree, and it's the same data. Its mind is incapable of projecting tree onto that thing. It is just data. That is true of the angry person and the beautiful person that you see on the street. There is no beauty that comes from them. There's no bliss that comes from them. There's no anger or hatred that comes from them to you. If you use that from the implication school and you understand where things come from, which is your perception, then your world can utterly transform. And this is the gakcha, the thing we deny. Gakcha, the thing we deny. We deny, all Buddhist schools deny, that there could ever be a thing existing out there separate to your perception. Or, on the other schools, separate to the parts or separate to the causes and conditions. But when you look at it through the idea of the prasangikas, that there could never be a thing, the gaccha is that thing that exists separate to the way I perceive it. Yeah? An angry boss yelling at me because they're bastards and I'm a nice person. That can never exist separate from my perception. Because if he's blank and my mind is projecting upon that blankness an angry human being, I could never act towards him angry because I realize that that's what caused him to be angry in the first place. My mind projecting anger and hatred onto somebody could only ever have come from the causes, the karma of my mind having planted anger out there in the first place. So the natural way to produce another shitty boss is to yell back or be angry at the shitty boss. And then your whole world can change. Because they're empty. In fact, if they existed from their own side, shitty and angry and yelling, you could never change it. And so understanding emptiness, this idea that things don't have a nature of their own, and in fact the only way they exist is because your mind is forever projecting onto those blank objects every single experience that you think is out there, and you understand that those impulses that are coming back at you as echoes are nothing but the things that you've planted in your mind through actions before, through karma, then you all of a sudden become a moral human being. Not because morality is the right thing to do, or the good thing to do, or the God-righteous thing to do. No. It's because if you want happiness in your world, if you want goodness in your world, if you want wisdom in your world, if you want to stop suffering in your world, you stop suffering. You stop anger. And so you have the echoes of anger and hatred and nominal goodnesses coming at you all the time. You guys are riding on the karmas of some good things you did before. You've got all the great human conditions of good minds, good bodies, good living conditions, nice clothes, good friends. You're riding on echoes of things you've done before. It's this time-lapse thing. So all you have to do, if you realize the nature of things, that things are blank, then you can never be angry at a person that's angry at you. In fact, it'd be like you're schizophrenic. You're angry at yourself because that's just you being angry back. Because your mind's projecting anger. You know, it's like you're yelling at yourself because you know you're going to have to hear that again. So, but on a nominal sense, understanding this and making you stop from yelling at that person that's making you upset, solves the problem not only of planting the karmas that will come back as echoes later, but it actually frees you up from planting the immediate discomfort of being angry. So that's an immediate result you can do now. I choose not to be angry anymore. You yell all you want, you can only look at them. If they're blank, and this is what your mind should do in a very practical sense. Next time you're in a blissful experience or in a horrible experience, your mind should grab this information very practically and say, that thing that's appearing to me is projected upon a blank object because I understand the nature of how things are, only because I did that in the past to some degree, and now it's grown into this. And if I want more of that, I better react to it in exactly the same way. So if I want more anger and hatred, I better yell at them and punch them. Reject them even emotionally, even a tiny rejection. Or you could just stand still, let that karma wear out, realize it comes from you, and all of a sudden you can't get angry if it's you that's yelling at you. It solves your problems instantly. The bad news is that you can't get the karmas of those actions that you do towards those beings around you and those things around you. You can't get them instantly. The problem of the time delay is there. You can't get a tree immediately upon planting a seed. You need to let it grow. And in fact, that's how you're experiencing your reality now. But realizing that things are empty, that they don't have a nature of their own, that they're blank, and therefore every experience you have from them can only come from your perceptions, allows you to see the fullness in those things around you as well. If they have the possibility of change, then they can change to the most magnificent thing without a limit. You can see the fullness in every single object. And whatever fullness you're imagining, it could even be bigger than that. So it becomes utterly possible to transform your world completely. From this world we live in to a majestic world of bliss. It's utterly possible. And the logic is seamless. But all we're doing today is scratching the surface of this idea. We're just touching it. The idea that things cannot come from themselves because if they did, everybody must perceive them that way, it's logic, it's black and white. It's simple. The way that they appear to us is dependent on causes or conditions or parts or perceptions. It's massive. You can verify that. And if that's true, then you can totally and utterly transform every single experience. And when you get to apply this same focus and wisdom onto this idea of wisdom, then you enter the secret teachings. And things unravel in a way that's incredible. So they say. I think that's all we've got to say for today. Let's have a quick dedication. If you've got a second of meaningful emotion, please dedicate it to all those people that are desperately looking for some meaning in their life to make sense of why things aren't working out for them right throughout the planet. And for those people that are getting wonderful results out of their lives and they think they got lucky, may this wisdom also touch them. Ukir Jishin Metokchan Riral Ninshin Yundem Pali Sangye Shindu Miteguargi Dropun Nanda Shimla Tripasho Iranguru Ratnamandala Kanrinyatayami Ligaogu Sunam Yeshe Tsoksokshin Sunam Yeshe Legendre Dampakuni Toparsho. Just imagine that being atop your head, entering and coming lower and lower until there are a tiny dot of light at your heart and filling you with that essence of wisdom and keeping it locked in your heart. Thanks for coming. Thank you.